Welcome to Deborah Says Radio Show, Self-Empowerment Strategies. Deborah K. Adams, M.A., is an international #1 best-selling book author, expert on education and prevention of domestic violence and all forms of violence. Deborah says, I have lived it, I have studied it, and I have worked it. Deborah's consulting business, Self-Empowerment Strategies, SES, evolved out of working with thousands of survivors of domestic violence and other forms of violence over the past 2 decades. Experience, study and research, and practical application led to the development of the SES priorities and the 5 A's to authenticity. Experiencing violence is traumatic, and it reduces your innate ability to function at your highest level. Deborah and her guests will share their knowledge, skills, and strategies. Join them in living free of violence with joy and out loud. Here she is, Deborah K. Adams.
Hello, listeners. This is Deborah Adams, and you are listening to Deborah Says. And SES is an acronym for me, which stands for Self-Empowerment Strategies. And I'm really excited today because I have a guest that I think you will enjoy hearing his perspective from his experience and his life. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about him just now. So his name is Mike Wilbur, and he has retired from a very satisfying career in the Army. And he began helping veterans with transitional housing issues or from service to real life issues in 1995 as a private business owner in Clark County, Washington. In 2008, he became employed by the Washington State Department of Veteran Affairs as an incarcerated veterans program specialist. Mike has completed his undergraduate degree in psychology and a master's degree in addictions counseling. And since then, he's taken his experience in education into the prisons to work as a volunteer since he is retired. He works as a counselor, working with domestic violence perpetrators. He has assisted veterans still having transitional difficulties, and he has a very keen interest in trauma counseling and how post-traumatic stress disorder and TBI play into aggressive behaviors. Mike is married to his lovely wife, Kai, of 28 years. They reside in Vancouver, Washington, and both are active in increasing awareness of domestic violence, its causes, and solutions. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Deborah.
That's an impressive bio, buddy.
Well, less than 100 words, I hope.
It doesn't matter. It can be as long as we need it to be. This is our time to talk. So, Mike, do you remember how you and I met? I always like to share that with listeners so they can see how small the world really is.
Yeah, I absolutely do. It's a couple of Octobers ago. You gave me a hug that's still with me today.
Oh, that's so sweet.
It was a candle lighting night for victims awareness. That's where I first saw you.
Yeah. And I was working for the nonprofit domestic violence program at the time, and you were just finishing up your perpetrator trainings requirements, right?
Yes.
That's right. And Mike spoke at one of our October events. And I actually think that was in 2012. 2011.
It was 12.
It was 12. And so Mike has an extensive personal experience with domestic violence, but I don't know how he will weave that into the story of his interest, because Mike really wants to talk about what are the warning signs of upcoming abuse and even maybe lethal abuse. Is that true?
It can be lethal, and the warning signs are very important.
The warning signs are important. And everybody always wants to know those warning signs, right?
Well, I think a lot of people turn their head away from it so they don't see it. I don't know if wanting to know really comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't look at it.
Don't look at it.
Yeah, we hope it goes away.
That's our first reaction. Will it go away? If I pretend I don't know about it, it'll go away.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes when people have experienced it firsthand, it often is still hard to acknowledge that it happened the way it did. And so one of the really important parts in your career since you retired from the Army that has always really impressed me is that you wanted to work with domestic violence perpetrators.
Well, it hasn't always been that way. I actually wanted to get into addictions counseling and go that route, but in 2011 that abruptly changed, and family tragedy that just put me on another rail. And so I left that graduate study program and just jumped right into domestic violence and trauma counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's a big part of my life now. In fact, you can say it's the only part.
Yeah. Amazing how that experience can change us. Do you think it's changed you for better?
Well, I want to think so. Every day we give it thought, and every day we think about children that we lost forever. But one thing I think that I try to get across to the young people that are married is if you were to take a line and draw it down the middle of a piece of paper, and on one side you say sociopath, and the other side you say normal. It's that normal person that you need to be careful of.
That's interesting.
And it's because they're not as predictable.
Right.
If someone grows up in life, maybe they're not taught how to cope. Everything is given to them on a silver platter. When problems arise, someone else always takes care of it. And they get into relationships, and perhaps they're into a stable job and everything is going very smoothly. Well, in all married life, it doesn't go smoothly.
Not all the time.
2/3 of the problems in marital life and any kind of relationship is just not solvable. And so the coping skills of the people come to the surface, and if you don't have them, or perhaps you're suffering from some anxiety and you take rejection or someone disagreeing with you as rejection, you get really anxiety prone.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates issues if you don't know what to do, how to process,
right,
or how to disagree with someone amicably.
And you're saying this is for us, quote unquote, normal people, right?
I'm saying that warning signs, don't think that someone that murders their family is a sociopath.
Right. It's not always that way.
It's just not the way it works. If that were the case, we'd be able to predict it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I've interviewed over 900 people in the Clark County Jail. 2/3 of those were violent acts, assaults of some sort against someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Half of those were on drugs, meth, alcohol. I've seen them get drunk several months after being locked up. They would have dry drunks. That's how bad off they were.
Uh-huh.
And aggression is part of their life.
Right. So, and when they were in Clark County Jail, you said they were in there for, the majority of them, right, were in there for violent offenses?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so were those violent offenses usually against someone in their family?
Most of the time. Girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife,
mm-hmm.
children,
mm-hmm.
violence against children.
Right. So that's a pretty large number of people that you've interviewed. That's an extensive little personal research story you have going there. And I know that your personal experience in your work has led you to write a book. Do you want to tell the listeners about that, Mike?
Well, it's not a scientifically based book. It's a chronology of events from before the fire that took our grandchildren's life, during and after. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not a scientifically based book. It was difficult because I had to reveal some things about myself. I wasn't comfortable with myself. In writing it, I benefited from it because I was able to see myself in a different light and make appropriate changes. And I'm satisfied with that outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could afford to give it away because I would just put it on everybody's shelf and every YWCA.
Yes.
But it's grim, and there's no happy ending to it, so I'm not sure that would be appropriate.
Yeah.
But,
do you think your writing the book is what helped you kind of learn how to recognize some of the warning signs of oncoming abuse?
Anytime we ask a question and seek an answer, yes. Yeah.
But you have to be able to hear the answer, right?
You have to. I ask the same questions over and over and over again. Sometimes I get different answers.
Mm-hmm.
And I scribble notes. I've got papers all over my computer on those same questions and research involved with why. That's the question.
Mm-hmm.
And just like science, everything begins with a question. But our behavior all begins with a thought. So I kind of went into the cognitive portion of studying and trying to figure out why this guy would kill his children.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's a reasonable question.
Sure is.
And it's one that many people would prefer not to have to ask. And you don't ever plan on having to be the person to ask that question. And I think it's really remarkable how you and your wife and your daughter have lived through that violence and tried to turn it into something positive for you. That's what I see.
Yeah, we see it as an event that happened. It's
Mm-hmm.
not going away.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't cause a lot of despair when I think of it. I think of the children fondly. Sometimes, I think I miss them.
Absolutely.
But I keep that to myself, and I go about my day. And if I need to get some solitude, I head for the lake or whatever I do.
Mm-hmm. I love the water.
Yeah, it's just
very soothing.
It's boundless. There's no walls to it. But it was very purposeful, and that's what I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a real grim story. You probably couldn't rewrite it.
Mm. So now that you've gone through that process, so to speak, do you feel like your questions got answered for you and the rest of your family?
The answers to my questions are pretty inconclusive, but you never know.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on inside the head of someone that feel that much despair at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of outside influences. Externally, people can be motivated. And if they're already down and out and depressed, suggesting things, or maybe their perception of what someone is saying is really distorted,
mm-hmm.
could cause a lot of bad things. And that's why families that are involved with intimate partner violence need to figure out how to get involved the right way.
Oh, I hear you.
The right way. Sometimes omitting to do anything is good, just watching.
Mm-hmm.
Other times you gotta make sure everyone is safe to include the dog.
So you're saying that sometimes even you might have to leave your own personal comfort zone in order to speak to something that you've witnessed or observed. And that is frightening from a family's perspective. I can really relate to that because I had an older brother that had kind of pulled away from me when I was in an abusive marriage, and it wasn't until after that, and he said to me, he goes, I didn't like the way he was treating you, but I thought if I said that to you, you would be mad at me, you wouldn't want to be around me, it would cause tension, and so I wouldn't have you in my life anyway, so I just chose to be quiet and distance myself from it. And I thought, well, that's valid, because he's probably right. I probably would have defended the father of my kids, no matter how he had treated me. But I told him, I said, well, I can appreciate what you're telling me, and I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm not saying you're right, but you were my older brother, and I held you in high regard. And I said, if you could have found a way to talk to me about that, maybe, just maybe, and it's not anybody's fault, but just maybe, I might have had a clue sooner than I did. It took 17 years, so maybe sooner than 17 years if someone I loved and trusted said, he's mistreating you. He doesn't show you respect. He has no right to call you those names. I'm just saying it's not anybody's fault. It just is. It's what happened. But I think it could have helped me. And so that has kind of been a crusade of mine as well in my anti-violence work, is to say, family, you have a role to play. You need to know how to talk to anybody in your family, whether you think they are the perpetrator or the victim. Right? Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And this case, father killing his children, but more than that, the domestic violence prior to that, it didn't happen just yesterday. And so this fella was a textbook case of progressive abuser. Mm-hmm. He did it emotionally to start with, right, just like you read in the books. Mm-hmm. He isolated her from her family, mm-hmm, subtly.
So, you're giving me goosebumps, Mike.
And everything that she ever said, mm-hmm, was probably turned on her.
Absolutely.
And because she had her upbringing and her convictions on how life is supposed to be, she is in her relationship to stay, to fix.
Right.
And I don't want to shame myself by telling Dad that something's wrong with her.
And that's a really
very typical, isn't it?
Yes, it's very typical. And I think I could certainly relate with how your daughter might have thought that, because that is exactly what I thought. I thought, I can't tell my family.
Shame. It's
too embarrassing. And my family experience prior was, you did get married and you were married to the same person for the rest of your life, and I have cousins and my brother that are all my age, and they are still married to their spouses that they knew from childhood. So I was like, this is not right. This is not how it's supposed to be, and it must be my fault.
I thought many times about the wedding vows, and when I hear "till death do us part," there's no meaning to that.
Absolutely for you. Yes.
I think not.
And we need to change those vows, don't we?
I think those words have a new meaning for us.
Yeah.
And for anyone that's ever lost a family member due to violence.
Yeah.
Where a person should be safe, and
yes,
they're not.
And they're not.
That's the epitome of terror in the home. It just shouldn't be. And that's why mostly the women, because 95% of the time it's the male that's doing the perpetrating.
Right.
It takes an immense amount of courage to say, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And make that plan, that conscious plan to get out.
Yeah.
Because I could tell you, those that are perpetrators of violence are not going to change anytime soon.
No.
Especially if it's caused by personality disorder. Now, any psychologist will tell you they'll either age out or die.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard about aging out.
You're going to age out of that behavior or you're going to die. Because that's the nature of it. They don't have a pill for personality disorders.
Right.
But as you and I discussed earlier, people can change their behavior if they practice.
And it's hard work to practice.
Well, take a sociopath that lies to you. What is the first thing they're going to do when you catch them in a lie?
Lie more.
Tell you another lie.
Oh!
And so, yeah, their lies, it's problematic to expect someone like that to change.
Yeah.
And for a woman, in this case, to commit to that kind of relationship is a waste of it.
Yeah. And it's like a death sentence, whether it actually ends in physical death or not. And so, Mike, your experience of speaking with all the perpetrators that you have that are incarcerated, and my experience is I probably talked to thousands of survivors or victims of domestic violence. And what I have always loved in our conversations between the two of us is that we really do see the need to address this in a way that is holistic, I guess, or concerns the whole family, the children, the in-laws, the parents. And that's really going to be key to changing social and cultural norms that we talked about earlier.
It is true when you speak to someone or interview someone on the front end of this kind of a crime, either minimizing or denying. It's all written in all the books. It really truly happens.
Yes.
Even those that say, yeah, I did, will turn right around in the same sentence and minimize it, try to justify why they did it, because they feel a little bit ashamed why they did it.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. I do the dance with them. It takes time when you are treating the perpetrator like that.
Right.
To come clean and say, yeah, my behavior caused that.
Mm-hmm.
Not anyone else.
Yeah.
We don't like to hear the she, what if.
Yeah. When you are able to observe them, let go of all those excuses and justifications, that must be rewarding for you.
Well, every day we get to talk to somebody is kind of a rewarding day for me. Does everyone get it? No. And you can't expect that realistically. Mm-hmm. Because there is recidivism in these sorts of things, and it's pretty hard in relationships. I mean, the most complex crime out there is a crime against your partner.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things intertwined in there and involved with it. It's not like going out and robbing a bank.
Yes.
You pencil it out, you're going to do this, and you go execute it.
And you have a need for money, and you just make the plan and go do it. This is way more complicated.
And you've got to weave a plan to control your partner, and my God, if that doesn't work, then you're going to have to do something else. Mm-hmm. It escalates a lot of times into physical violence. But unfortunately, and I'm stepping on the line here, when it doesn't get physical and they just live a life of emotional terror, how terrible can that be?
Yes. Yeah. So that's kind of one of the things, that's kind of how I try to identify or define domestic violence when I'm doing speaking or educating, because it's about that personal relationship. That's key, because that has all kinds of traps, hidden traps for humans in that kind of relationship. But then you have to look at the types of behaviors that are used. And then I also like to share that those behaviors will escalate.
Especially if there's semi-successful, maybe they run into roadblocks, they're going to change tactics. Mm-hmm. They'll escalate.
Mm-hmm. For instance, just because I can say it, being called a name, like being called stupid or fat or a bad mother or a bad human being. And then pretty soon your survivor victim says, well, you know what, I've heard that all along. You can say it as much as you want. I'm not going to let that bother me, so I'm not going to let you use that to control me. So then the perpetrator person will escalate the behavior, right? From name calling, they'll have to make it a little bit more violent, I call it. It's like a continuum. It starts on a low end and can escalate over time. And what I also have noticed is that time period shrinks between assaults. You agree with that?
What I do believe is the escalation, I think, sometimes can come from severe attachment disorders. Mm-hmm. They're not getting satisfied in the attention that they're getting for some reason. It's critical. And who's going to recognize that behavior out there? 19, 20-year-old husband and wife, they just act it out.
Yeah.
They don't understand it.
That nobody understands it. It just is.
Yeah, and so we've got domestic violence laws that if you punch me in the nose and you draw blood, somebody's going to jail. Mm-hmm. But if you never hit me, or I never hit you, and I just committing home terror, mm-hmm. No one's going to take me to jail. We've got issues there. It's a society issue.
Right.
And it's what we think of male-female mm-hmm. relationships. Mm-hmm. That has to change in every home in America, in the world for that matter.
It does. I was thinking when you were saying that it does come down to strict gender roles a lot of times, mm-hmm. and that's usually comes from how you're raised or what your belief system is. And that is really difficult to change for us human beings, yes?
Well, of course. I have a sister living in another state, been married to the same Same guy for 46 years, lived in the same house for 46 years, and they have roles. He's a breadwinner, she stays home. Mm-hmm. Now she's working a little bit because getting a little bored. They're retired now.
Right.
But there was roles. And to an outsider looking in that maybe didn't share their philosophy, they would think, well, he sure is domineering. But in fact, they agreed on their roles. Mm-hmm. And to some people, they wouldn't agree with that. But to my knowledge, she's never been beat up or abused emotionally. Mm-hmm. Of course, no one knows what goes on behind closed doors, but
you don't know, but you can sometimes see those signs that you were talking about. Some clues, sometimes, yeah.
The point is, it's a really complex problem, and as some couples would agree on roles to play, mm-hmm. mutually agree, and it could be role reversal. It could be me staying home doing the cooking and you be the major breadwinner. It's not so uncommon these days, mm-hmm. and it's okay if the couple agree.
Absolutely. And I think everyone has the right to make those agreements in their relationship. But so when does it start becoming domestic violence, in your opinion?
Nice question. If I have to walk on eggshells around you for some reason, if I can't be who I want to be when I want to be it around you, that's a red flag.
That's a red flag. So give an example of that, if you could.
Well, let's say a husband comes home and has the strangest way of asking for sex. Mm-hmm. And there's non-conformance. Just say wife has a headache. It just doesn't want to engage that day. Mm-hmm. Could be passively aggressive towards that kind of a response from the spouse. Mm-hmm. It probably could go on for days. And so maybe the wife is feeling guilty. She's made to feel guilty because she didn't perform. Right. And that would put her walking on eggshells.
Yes.
Just the sexual act could cause that, or the lack of it. Mm-hmm. And so, our moral compass has got to be focused.
Mm-hmm. And I think somewhere, I mean, in the United States, kind of oral history is you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You just put your nose to the grindstone and make it happen. And I think people try to apply that to relationships, but that doesn't mean that you have to give up who you are as a human being. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Certainly, yeah. People have got to mutually respect one another. There are major differences between you and I, between the male and female, and that's the attraction, for the most part. There are other examples of relationships, but it's generally the differences that attract one another.
Right.
And you shouldn't forget that.
Do you think at times, and so we could either take those differences for granted or think we know what they are and we may not really know what they are. Like, I've heard of people when they got married, everything was fine until one of the partners wanted to have children. The other partner does not.
A disagreement. Those 66% of the disagreements that are not solvable, what do you do?
Yeah, what do you do with that? And that's a core belief in a human being, that I'm going to grow up and have a family, I think. Do you?
I can't answer for what a woman would feel about childbirth. Mm-hmm. I hear from my wife that it's a natural yearning. Mm-hmm. There is an anomaly out there. Sometimes it's not so.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of ways that we could strengthen ourselves as human beings and still be able to disagree with each other and still be in a great relationship.
It all goes back to being prepared, having life's needs met, mm-hmm. all the way down at the bottom of that hierarchy of human needs that you know about.
I do.
Give me the toothpaste, the soap, and the paper, and I'll go from there, and we'll work our way up. And if people are taught to live that way, live organized. Mm-hmm. In other words, go to school, get a job, get married, have children, if this is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
In an appropriate order. In other words, if you're broke, don't do it.
Yeah.
There's the reality that you need to make a living to support your children. Yes. Care for them.
Yes.
And if you've ever seen a life spiral out of control because of lack of finances, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Don't you think that's another one of those huge differences that are sometimes unresolvable?
You and I could be really cool partners. You and I could meet on the street and say, we have so much in common.
Mm-hmm.
We want the same things. Well, the problem with young people going into a relationship with that mindset
mm-hmm.
is the way a female solves a problem and a male solves a problem is entirely different.
Totally different.
You are so multifunctional. You can think from both sides of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
I got to do it one at a time. And so it's confusing if the guy doesn't understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a scientific fact.
Right.
You're smarter. You're better. You're the new and improved version.
Yeah. Well, I like to think that there's room for all people. How we think doesn't mean one is better than the other, but just to leave room in a relationship for that to develop naturally would be a good place to start, right?
I just, in the years of working with veterans, for example, that were in trouble, you would think someone would need counseling, but in fact, sometimes you would fix something that was broke, for example, a housing issue, a job issue,
mm-hmm.
and that would take care of the problem.
That goes back to your basic needs being met,
basic
right?
needs being met. And so once you do that and get someone's attention, this is when you can teach.
Yeah.
You got to create that teachable moment.
Yes.
You don't do that while someone's in a moment of despair.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine that's true for perpetrators as well as survivors. But that is like the number one reason why people stay in these bad relationships is because I can't provide those basic needs for myself or my children. I think I can. This is my view.
Or you've been trained that you can't take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Because on the lower end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that it takes so much effort for people. You said it earlier, it takes a lot of courage for survivors to actually leave, and I agree with that. Just based on our social and cultural norms, that is huge. And I have to say that I've been a single person for a while, and everybody wants to fix me up all the time. And it's like, hey, I'm okay. I don't need to be fixed up, but it's almost as if that makes people around me uncomfortable, that I don't have another part, that I'm partner with. And it's like, well, that's okay. For me, right, it's fine. And you shouldn't be worried about that. I'm thinking there's probably things you could worry about in your own relationship without worrying about mine. But yeah, it's just this whole thought that we have to be in twos, Noah's Ark, right? To be in twos and prepare for the worst. And we can't ever change that. And I think that's the key, is we have to allow people room to change.
Agreed. And this terrible thing that happened to our family opened my eyes to making sure that my wife is doing everything that she wants to do when she wants to do it. Can she access the bank accounts? Can she do everything in my absence?
Right.
Have I taken care of what I'm supposed to take care of?
Mm-hmm.
Do I vacuum? Do I do dishes? Do it. Are we in an equal relationship?
Yeah.
Equal power and control.
Yeah. And that's great.
Of course. Yeah, I do exactly what I'm told when I'm supposed to.
That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant at all.
Let me tell you what carry a relationship along, and that's humor.
Yes, true.
That's humor.
Yeah, gotta have a sense of humor.
And you have to accept where you are in life.
Mm-hmm.
Acceptance is a big thing with me. Now I'm an old guy. There's a lot of things I accept that I didn't used to accept.
And it gets easier as we get that wisdom, don't you agree?
Yeah, wouldn't you like to turn the clock back?
Could I be 20 again? Is that what you're saying?
It's picking up.
Yeah.
Life is good. It'll be better.
Mm-hmm.
Just a matter of positive mental attitude.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I think that you mentioned, or in your bio, that you work with veterans on the transitional issues. And do you think there's a bigger prevalence of intimate partner issues when they come back from a war with their partners? I think there's been some studies out about that.
There's a lot of studies, and I don't like to rely on just one thing. But if you take someone that's had a pretty disheveled upbringing, let's say, a childhood trauma stuff, and then you compound that with maybe a war trauma. Or it doesn't even have to be a war trauma. It could be a high-stress environment in the military where you're constantly packing and going. You're always on a high state of alert, and you're made to perform. And
they really don't want you to think when you're in those situations too much.
And rightfully so. There's things that you have to do without thinking.
Right.
It saves lives that way.
Yes.
But then you come home to a relationship and you have that mindset. That said, I think that could be causal, or at least contributing to relationships, bringing that home. The black and white world as it is in the military just doesn't hold water out there. And so when they take a soldier, male, female, into a training environment for 2 or 3 months, 4 or 5 months maybe after their advanced training, and train them to do something a certain way with a group of people, send them away, come back in 3 or 4 years and get out.
Yeah.
They're not retrained to this world again.
They're not deprogrammed, if you will.
Well, yeah, I take exception to that because I think that it was an honorable way to make a living.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, Mike.
I was programmed to do things a certain way, like that.
But like you said, there's a lot of good reasons for that. Yeah. Safety being one. And knowing what your partner's going to do and what you have to do, or whoever's next.
To answer your question, I think it's causal. I think it's certainly a contributing factor in relationships going south in the military. Same would hold true for a police officer or deputy. When you're in a high-stress environment, this goes home. Just can't turn it off at the door. So you have to learn coping mechanisms. You've got to learn how to shut it down, and you just can't do it right now.
Right.
So people need to learn that.
Absolutely. Well, I want you to tell the listeners how they can get your book if they would like to read it. I've read it, and I found it a little bit hard to read. It took me some time. But we were talking earlier about how we both think it's important for people to be able to know about it and learn about it to be prepared for it. Would you like to share your website?
Yeah, I'd like to share not only the website, but where the book can be purchased. The title is More Than Domestic Violence. The subtitle is An Insidious Story. It can be found on Amazon.com, More Than Domestic Violence. Or you can go to my website, morethandomesticviolence.com, and you'll see it there. You can even pick up, if you want to use PayPal, you can pick a PDF version of the book up for, I think, less than $5. But anyway, visit the website, morethandomesticviolence.com, and you'll see the work we do in the prison with domestic violence perpetrators and our veteran community. There's a part on the website that you don't see, but if you join it, you'll be able to ask questions about veterans issues that I get back to you in 24 hours.
Very nice.
And so, so I'm always online looking for those questions that people can't find answers to.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think that, and I don't mean to single out veterans as being they're not the only ones that could have this as an issue in their private lives. It is a human trauma that we're actually talking about, and it can impact any one of us. In fact, you and I both know that there's like no demographic that is not impacted by domestic violence, right?
I have seen 6-figure people that's what they bring in a year in jail for battery.
Yeah, I think the general public some folks might have a kind of like a stereotypical thought that it only happens to poor or people of color or less educated or they don't know better, those kinds of things. But what we know is that's not true. I could share a story too about, I met this incredible woman and she was working and she had been divorced from her husband for about 5 years, and they had 2 grown children. And her friends wanted her to come and talk to someone about domestic violence. And she said, I don't know why. I'm divorced. In fact, he's even passed on. But they think I need to talk to someone about domestic violence. And so we had this conversation. So we talked about the definition. we have tools, of course, that we advocates use, and shared them with her, and ways that she could make that connection. And it started, of course, with what you said earlier, is that emotional abuse. And she said, why is that still bothering me? I divorced him. He never once hit me. I divorced him. He's even dead. But she, like we said earlier, if you don't process some of these experiences, it kind of stays with us.
It'll come back in the strangest of ways, probably.
Yeah. And we did work together, and she was just the nicest person, but she said, I just can't believe that I'm here talking to you about this. You know, she was, I would say, 60 years old at the time, and she's just like, I just had no idea that this could be it. And that's the importance of us talking about this. And it's not that either one of us wants to harp on our personal experience, but our personal experience kind of informs who we are and maybe what we do in the future. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Like, you didn't know you would be doing this when you were 20.
Well, of course not. And if you're a family out there, if you're the father-in-law or the mother-in-law, you see it happen and confront it. Find a way to confront it. Just like you're running into somebody that you suspect might be contemplating suicide, you confront that. Well, why not this too? Mm-hmm. And because there's too much at risk. I mean, the peripheral damage that goes on, the neighbors, the immediate extended family, mm-hmm. Probably hundreds of people in this family alone were affected by that, not to mention our community. Mm-hmm. And so, and I know that based on the number of people that went to the memorial, that this community was really affected. Mm-hmm. And so, in a sense, because of all that, we owe the community something. And that is get the word out to the families to just make sure you're who you are, mm-hmm. who you want to be, when you want to be it. Mm-hmm. If you find yourself walking on eggshells with a relationship and you're afraid, and if you're listening, you know you're afraid. Mm-hmm. You need to find someone to talk to give you some kind of strength. You're the one that needs to be empowered to do the right thing.
Right.
And the right thing doesn't always feel good.
No. I always say being a human being is messy business.
Yeah. This thing we call life is pretty tricky.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Totally.
And we're not all getting out of it alive, sure.
Well, right. But we do our best, right? We put one foot in front of the other, and it's better when we can share the burden with someone else. And I think talking to someone else about whatever it is on your mind, whether it be domestic violence or something that happened when you were a child and now you're an adult, but just to acknowledge it and really seek some support around that issue can go a long ways. And you're right, this is something that impacts. I now have 4 grown children, two daughters and 2 sons, and I talk to my kids about it all the time. My oldest daughter was actually in an abusive relationship, and she was not happy with me when I said he's abusive. And this is impacting not only you, but your beautiful daughter, my beautiful granddaughter. And but I said, I love you, and I'm going to be here, and if you need me, you call me. I didn't say, if you don't leave this person right now, I'm not ever going to speak to you again. I knew she had to have that somebody to call, and I kept telling her, I love you, and I wouldn't tell you this if I didn't love you, but she didn't feel it was out of love. I was telling her.
She felt the boot, huh?
She felt it, yeah. The way most of us would, but eventually she did come to me, and, I did whatever I could to help her remove herself and my beautiful granddaughter from that relationship. And I have 2 sons. They were 10 and 12 when we separated from their abusive father. And so when they grew into teenagers and young men, they would come to me once in a while and say, am I being like my dad? Am I being abusive? This is what happened. And I just felt so blessed that we could have those conversations. And I would say, let's talk about it and let's realize what's your responsibility and what's your partner's responsibility, and are you leaving each other room to be change and grow and all those things. And so it was really, it's just a lifelong impact is what I'm saying, because now they're having children, right? And I certainly don't want my grandchildren to have to live through that, but if I don't talk about it, they're going to. Right?
No.
We don't know for sure, but it's a possibility. When we're talking 50-50, that's pretty high odds. I just appreciate that you're doing the work that you're doing, and I've always thought it was important to have male voices simply because the majority of perpetrators are male. I mean, yeah, I can talk to my sons, but wouldn't have been better if they could have talked to their dad or some other. And fortunately for my sons, they did have some other strong male role models in their families, or in their lives. So some of those were coaches and teachers. So whatever role you play, it's really important to be able to
well, I think the community where we live needs to infiltrate the high schools and the junior high schools, maybe to junior high schools, start right there for an hour once in a while.
Yeah.
And I don't see that happening.
Yeah. How would you approach making that happen? Mike is working on the task force in our community, and so is that something that you'd like to see the task force take on, or?
Just a thought. I think in order to get an answer to the question of can we do this, is we simply ask. We'd like to come into the gymnasium one day, or set up a place where students who need to talk to someone can go talk to someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is important for our youth to at least be able to get some support about what they've lived through, or their perspective.
Yeah, or have a curriculum in school about relationships. When we went to high school, we went to home economics, right?
Yeah.
I know you didn't see any guys in the class back then. But
and it wasn't a lesson on relationships that we learned, right?
It was a great place for it, though.
It would have been. We learned how to make pies, and you learned how to cross stitch.
What about the economics part of home economics?
There was none of that. We didn't talk about budgets.
Well, that's the guy job back then.
It was totally the guy job back then. No, we didn't talk about that. Fortunately, when I was I think I was a senior, I took a woodworking class at my high school, and that was fun and interesting, and actually liked building things. But that comes again from that social and cultural expectation, strict gender roles. But when I look at this picture of your grandkids, I mean, it just melts my heart. And I have to tell you that your grandkids were in classes with my grandkids. So we were aware of it before I knew you. And it did have an impact, much larger than you thought or can imagine. And so I don't know if that's any consolation to you that many people were grieved by that incident, not just you and your wife. Yeah.
And we've always appreciated and actually very helpful to have that large of a turnout. It's just, I guess what more helpful though is to write things down. It's back on a little, I like to harp on people to write things down, because when you read it, you process it differently rather than sit there and think about it and stew over it.
Yeah.
Write it down and relook at it. Back on relationships, humor, compromise, because guaranteed going into those relationships, there's some unsolvable problems. Get used to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, many marriages or the relationships are long-term. So there are people that are being able to manage those hurdles as they come to them. It is possible. And that is totally one reason why you're doing the work you're doing, because you just have hope. You believe people can change.
I do. And I'm changing day by day. And hopefully the people that I spoke to today at the Clark County Jail will make a change too.
Yeah, I support you in that work, and I'm honored to know you, and grateful for the work you're doing for our community and the world at large. And I too believe people can change. That's the way it is with me. I'm an optimist, I guess. But like I said to you earlier, I didn't have that scientific data, but I was pretty sure people could change. So, Mike, I want to thank you for joining me on Deborah Says tonight and sharing your thoughts with our listeners. And if you just wait a minute, I'm going to close up the show, and you can sit in the green room, and I'll be back to you in a few minutes. So thank you, listeners, for listening to Deborah Says. It's been a wonderful experience for me, and I hope you've learned something, and I hope you appreciate Mike's willingness to talk about something very personal and in a very positive way. And that's what we can only hope for, right? That we can learn to talk about our personal traumas in a positive way. Thank you for listening. I will see you next Tuesday, same time, at 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I hope you have a great week. Thank you, and bye.
Thank you for listening. You can reach Deborah at Deborah K. Adams, MA, @gmail.com, or go to her websites, www.sissies.net, www.deborahkadamssays.com, www.deborahkadamsthemissingpiece.com. See you next Tuesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where Deborah says. And remember, you are empowered.